Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast where we share insight from the industry leaders on how to build great tech products and companies. This is Ankur and Nalima, your hosts. In today's show, we have Nir Zuk, co-founder and CTO at Palo Alto Networks, the leader in cybersecurity. Nir founded the company over a decade ago when he saw a clear opportunity in creating the next-gen firewalls. Nir is a celebrity among security professionals. You know that because he has no LinkedIn profile, but is all over the internet. He's on Wikipedia, YouTube, Forbes, Fortune, TechCrunch, everywhere. If you're a technologist who has a vision for the future and want people to rally behind your vision and in the process create new markets and industries, you don't want to miss this episode. Hi, Nir. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Ankur. Hi, Nilima.
It's so great to have you. I know it's been difficult to get the schedule lined up, but I am so glad that finally we're able to catch up. As we get started, our listeners would love to rather know your journey leading up to Palo Alto Networks. I presume that you grew up in Israel. How was it? How was the childhood like? How was the teen years? Were you a hacker back then? Was security in the DNA from the get-go?
Yeah, when I was a teenager in the 80s, first I worked for a computer shop that had a lot of books. I couldn't afford to buy books, so I was working as a consultant for people coming in to buy stuff. And in my free time, I was reading computer books and learning how to program assembly and stuff like that. And then I wrote my first virus, I think when I was 16 or something like that. And I got recruited into the Israeli intelligence. Like everyone in Israel, I had to go to the military. I was recruited by the Israeli intelligence and ended up in the same small group as the two of the three founders of Checkpoint. And they were older than me, and they left the service before I did, a few years before I did. And then I started Checkpoint right when I was about to leave the service. So I joined them, and that's how I got into cybersecurity. Not that firewalls are cyber, but that was the cybersecurity back then.
Very interesting background. And for our listeners, Checkpoint is Palo Alto's or has been a chief rival for over a decade now. So just an incredible journey, starting with somebody who Palo Alto obviously competes feverishly now. So you start at Checkpoint, you start working on, I presume, the Gen 1 firewalls, Nir?
Well, I don't know what Gen 1 and Gen 2 and 3 are. It's a marketing BS that Checkpoint is trying to push. But back then, they were access control based firewalls, so ACLs, embedded in routers usually. And there were proxies. And neither did the work, proxy firewalls, neither did the work. And at Checkpoint, we created something called Stateful Inspection, which is now the basis for all firewalls, except of our firewall at Palo Alto Networks. We're stateful, but we don't use stateful inspection. We replaced it with something called App ID.
Got it. I'm assuming that just coming out of the service, you joined Checkpoint. I'd assume that you were a developer, obviously awestruck by this incredible founders. How many years rather did you spend at Checkpoint?
I spent at Checkpoint 2 years in Israel, and then just over 2 years. And then I was relocated to California and stayed another 2.5 years with Checkpoint. And I left in the middle of 99. Took some time off. My first daughter was born at that time. And then in late 99, I started a company with Rakesh Lunkar called OneSecure, which built the first IPS, intrusion prevention system in the world. Until then, there were only IDSs. So I built the first IPS in the world. And then very quickly, NetScreen acquired us. NetScreen was a firewall company that was Checkpoint's biggest rival at the time. And I stayed with NetScreen for 2 years, and then Juniper acquired NetScreen. And literally the next day, they told us that they're not interested in the products, and that a few months later, they told us they're not interested in the people because engineers in China and India are much cheaper. So everybody left. I left. I started Palo Alto Networks in Officially in early 2005, practically, really, we got funded in January 2006.
Got it. We'll get plenty of time to talk about Palo Alto Networks, but I'm really curious. So you were probably in your 20s. You could have you moved to California, have a big Silicon Valley salary, just had a kid. But you somehow like just decide to start a company, take that risk when I guess right around the dot com era. What led you to starting a new company versus just take a cushy job and spend a few years?
I didn't like working for Checkpoint because I couldn't build products there. It became very political. We actually, so when I moved to California in early '97, we started an engineering group in California, and we started building products that we were going to integrate into the firewall. The first product we built was a QoS product, which was integrated and is, I think, still being sold, maybe. I'm not sure. But then we built a product that was a few years early than companies like, what's the name of that company? We built a product that does bandwidth management, bandwidth optimization, link optimization, in order to enhance the ability of applications to work over congested internet connections. Riverbed would be that company. And
Of course, yeah.
that product was working. We integrated it into the firewall. And then engineers back in Israel started complaining that they're busy all day fixing bugs in the firewall, whereas the engineers in California are having fun building new stuff. And of course, the solution was let's kill what the engineers in California built rather than, let's fire all the engineers in Israel that are complaining. So I realized that this is not a place to build products. I left the company and started the company to build products. Yes, I did leave a lot of money on the table, and I didn't care. For me, it's about building products. And the same story, by the way, with Juniper. The reason I left Juniper is because we couldn't build products there anymore. They decided not to take NetScreen products. They said they wanted to rebuild them inside the routers. We told them, and when I say we, I mean myself, Lee Klarich, who runs product for Palo Alto Networks, was there at the time as well, and a few others. And we told them, look, if you're going to build a new firewall, we might as well build a new firewall, not the same firewall again.
Yeah.
And they just wouldn't listen. And then they moved engineering to India and China. And I realized we could not build products over there. I left and started Palo Alto Networks to build products. And I left a lot of money on the table there as well, all the NetScreen acquisition money.
It's really interesting that you always choose to work in things that interested and excited you. A lot of people are kind of stuck in their good old job for whatever reason. Like, why do you think some people just can't move their shitty jobs and go somewhere else? Like what advice would you have for those people?
I think because they're scared. Usually it's because they're scared. It's because they don't know if the money that they leave on the table, they can make it again. And for some reason, they care a lot about that. I just don't think it's worth it. Life is too short. If you like to build products and you're in a job that doesn't let you build products, then find another job that lets you build products, or start a company to build products. You don't. I mean, look, in every company, you're going to feel that there is some politics and that there is some fighting before you can build the feature that you really think needs to be built or the product that needs to be built. That's okay. But when you just can't do your job anymore and it takes you forever to do any little thing that you're trying to do, for me, it's not worth it. And I recommend to everyone to just move on.
So, Nir, very interesting insights. Were some of these principles applied when you started, like in the early days at Palo Alto Networks? Because I do know it was one of the companies where engineering, like all the team was at one place. And that really used to fascinate me when I was part of McAfee, that, everything is at one place, engineering, everyone is co-located. Was that one of the guiding principles based on some of the acquisition and the story we hear about the checkpoint?
Yeah, well, Checkpoint is also mostly in one place in Israel. Engineering in the US, and they have engineering just in Israel. But so NetScreen was also, but Juniper was very distributed, and other companies are distributed. And when I started Palo Alto Networks in 2005, it was not just my experience; it was also experience from many friends of mine whose boards require their companies to be distributed because it's cheaper to do engineering elsewhere. And I didn't want to do that. I heard all the horror stories that creates, and how they have to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning to work with one side of the planet and go to sleep at midnight to work with another side of the planet. And I know McAfee is like this, and there are quite a few other companies like that. And I didn't want that. And we had an agreement with the board from day zero that they don't even bring up the idea in board meetings to move some of the engineering to India and China. And, at Palo Alto Networks, it. The first time we had engineering in India is when we acquired Redlock, where Ankur used to work and was a founder there. And that's why we have engineering in India. We never opened one. And when in about 5.5 years ago or 6 years ago, when we did decide that we needed another engineering location, we decided that second engineering location was going to be Israel because of the cybersecurity talent in Israel. And then we made our first acquisition in Israel, which jump-started our engineering office in Israel.
Got it. Palo Alto's Wikipedia says the key insight, and I think you alluded to that already in the interview, was provide ability for enterprises to define fine-grained control at application level. Take us through your thinking at the time. Our average listener doesn't understand stateful, stateless, application identification. Let's talk about the anatomy of a network attack. Let's start there. How does it happen? What did the Gen 1 kind of do? And then what was your key insight as you started the application ID and Palo Alto?
Yeah, so actually, application ID was not the key idea behind Palo Alto Networks. I can talk about that in a second, what really was application app ID. But the main idea behind Palo Alto Networks was consolidation through integration. Network security is very fragmented. There are firewall vendors, there are IPS vendors, there are proxy vendors, there are sandbox vendors. That was what was back then. And then over the years, you see more and more network security vendors in different areas like IoT security and network traffic analysis and UEBA and network DLP and so on come out to the market. And the idea was to build a platform that can take all of these and turn them into a set of subscription services running on top of one product, which we ended up calling a next generation firewall. App ID was really the insertion plan. So when you build a new product, you have to have something that's going to make customers buy it and replace other products, right? And going to customers and saying, throw away your firewall, your IPS, your proxy, and replace them with our product is not going to fly with most customers. Okay, replacement for enterprise doesn't work very well. What you want is something that's very, very different that's going to convince them to take your products rather than others. And that thing was App ID. So App ID was an insertion plan, what's called an insertion plan, a go-to-market plan. What's going to cause customers to buy our products? The real reason we wanted to build our products, have customers buy them, and the real change we wanted to make in the market is to turn network security and later cybersecurity into a SaaS delivered industry. Okay, so the idea behind App ID in 2005, when we worked on the business plan and presented it to our first investors, our initial investors, which were Greylock Partners and Sequoia Capital, the idea was that the internet back then was mostly web browsing and SMTP email. For enterprises, some FTP, some SSH, some Telnet. But it was very clear to us back then, and so it was for our initial investors, that the internet is going to be used for much more for enterprises. Back then, only consumer were using applications beyond those basic ones. Applications like internet-based video, internet-based audio, social media was just emerging back then. Instant messenger and so on, it was clear that technology is going to move into the enterprise. And back then, stateful inspection and all the products based on stateful inspection, as well as the few remaining proxy-based products just couldn't handle those applications. So they could secure SMTP, they could secure HTTP, FTP, but anything beyond that was was not supported back then. We saw the need for it initially in order to show enterprises which applications their employees are using, right? So provide them visibility. Most enterprises were thinking that they're able to block these applications, that their employees follow the rules and only use the internet for web browsing and email. We went in with our product, put it in as a sniffer, immediately show them all the other applications that their employees are using, all the malware that's coming in, all the data that's leaking out, and so on. And that was the insertion plan. We put our firewall on the network. Within a few hours, we showed them exactly what's going on. And very quickly, we got a PO, not to replace the firewall, but for a product sitting behind the firewall. Yeah. And over time, as we grew in size, as we became more known in the industry, as we proved to customers that our products are stable, they replaced the firewalls with us. And that's how we became a real firewall vendor. And we could start really delivering on our vision, which is replace not just the firewall, but everything around it. Yeah, when we started Palo Alto Networks, there were IPS companies, quite a few. There aren't any now. They were all either acquired or killed. There were proxy companies. All the proxy companies back then are now dead. There's a new proxy company called Zscaler, and we'll kill them too. We're in the process of doing that too. Back then, there was one sandbox company, FireEye. They had probably 1,000 or 2,000 customers when we came out to the market with our sandbox as a service running on top of the firewall. Today, they have maybe 2,000 customers that are struggling. And we have tens of thousands of customers using our sandbox. So it's very clear that moving network security, from a set of products that you deploy in the network to a set of subscription services, SaaS delivered subscription services delivered from the cloud, running on top of a single device called next generation firewall, was the way to go, and that's what customers are buying. Today, if you look at our firewall business versus the business of selling subscription services on top of the firewall, the latter is much bigger. We sell much more in subscription services running on top of the firewall than we sell in the firewall itself.
Very interesting. Lot to unpack in all of this. I think the one thing that struck with me, and I think a lot of the product builders and founders can find it useful, is that the initial insertion plan was to sit behind an existing firewall, because displacing a virtual appliance or a physical appliance is hard, if not impossible, in the enterprise. So first is just kind of passively monitor the traffic, show additional value, and over time kind of do the displacement.
That's if your startup, if your idea is displacing others through disruption. Other startups like the one you've been involved with, Anchor, and the one, Lima, you've been involved with, right? The Misto. Other startups build something new, something that doesn't exist in the market. And then it's not a replacement business. The struggle is not to go and replace. The struggle is to build a market, right? And it's a different playbook.
Okay. So coming from Demisto, I recall our early days were like really, really exciting. There were ups and lows and ups every day. What were the early days at Palo Alto Networks like?
Yeah, the early days at startups are always exciting until you have to start selling, right? When you have to start selling, that's when you know if what you've done was good or not. And luckily for the two of you, you were involved with startups that had really good ideas and were able to sell their products fast into the market. But yeah, look, it's very exciting to build new stuff. And then after you ship it, some of it moves into maintenance mode, right? You have to maintain what you've done, and there are customer requests, and all of a sudden customers start determining your part of your roadmap at least, and it gets a little bit less exciting. But that's life. That's how it is.
And how many times did the customers actually ask, like, is this going to be a part of firewall? Are you building a firewall? And what was the answer there?
Oh, we were very clear from the beginning. We're building a firewall. We called it the next generation firewall. It's not trivial. We had a lot of arguments around it about whether we should call it a firewall or a firewall helper. Not literally firewall helper, but some name that would indicate that it's a firewall helper. And we knew we wanted to be the firewall. We knew we wanted to replace the firewall. So we decided to call it a next generation firewall, which of course created some friction in the early days, right? Because buying a second firewall sometimes is very politically charged.
Yeah. In the early days with the sales cycle, were you kind of shadowing the sales guys, helping them actually refine the pitches? Because as you said, even selling additional over the firewall, the customer would prefer the vendor, existing vendor. So it's very hard to kind of do the insertion point at that.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we did in the early days, actually, what I did in the early days is mostly to generate interest in the product, because very early on we learned that when we do an eval, meaning when we convince the customer to put our product, our next generation firewall, as a sniffer on their network, we get a PO, because we show them so much crap running through the network. We show them how they're completely insecure and how their existing products don't really secure them against almost anything. That our challenge was to get a box on the network, which sounds easy. It's not. So I was flying around the country and we did a lot of events in very small places. Today when I do an event, it's usually, I'm not talking about today during Corona time where, it's all Zoom. Physical events today, when I do physical events, it's usually hundreds, if not thousands of people in the audience. And I'm sure you're the same, right? Back then, I remember an event. I flew all the way to Boston from San Francisco for an event. Actually, it was Connecticut. I flew to Boston and I had to drive down to Connecticut, and there were 3 people in the audience. And one of them was a friend of the reseller that was never going to buy anything anyways. So no, that's the beginning. It's hard work. And sometimes the events, you only have 3 people. We had the deal, unfortunately, with Maggiano's, Maggiano's restaurant chain.
Absolutely. One of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had the deal with them to do events all over the country. So I think they have like 30 or 40 restaurants around the country, and I flew to all of them. And I had to eat their, well, they might be a customer, sorry, their wonderful food in 40 different places, the same food again and again and again. And, sometimes I'll get 10 people in the audience, sometimes it will be 50. And, out of each of these events, we'll have two evals, which was enough. That was my early days. Yeah. And, I think that's the same applies today to many of our products. It's all about getting the product in the infrastructure, right? Prisma Cloud is like that. Just get a customer to link it to their account. And when you show them what you show them, they buy the product. And the Misto is somewhat the same. I mean, the Misto takes a little bit more time to deploy than just putting something there. But yeah, and that's, by the way, something that I would recommend to all your listeners that are planning to start a company, is try to find a way when you build a product to do a very quick evaluation and show value very quickly. Meaning, if you can, with a few mouse clicks, or in our case it was, because it was 15 years ago, if you can just deploy a box on the network on a span port on a switch, or on a optical tap into the network, or like in the case of Redlock, right? All you have to do is log in into your AWS account through Redlock. If that's all the customer has to do, and within a few hours or a few days you show them value, it makes your life as a founder, as an entrepreneur, much, much easier, because then the focus is get them to do an eval. Then the product sells itself.
So a follow-up question on, started selling with the sales. When did you basically feel that now we're getting real traction and we kind of we have to start thinking of the next stage?
Plan from the beginning. We knew what we were going to do in version 1.0 and 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0. And if we could, we would have done everything in 1.0. We just didn't have time. So we had that. And very quickly, we realized that our gut feeling that this is going to be big was true. Started very fast. I think we did like 5 million in the first year or something like that, and then 16 in the second. So even though it was hardware business, the big change came probably 5 years ago. So after 8 years of selling, when more or less when we became the largest network security vendor in the world, or when we saw that being inevitable, we decided that we need to move into the next thing. Because remember, I started Palo Alto Networks to consolidate cybersecurity, but not just network security, but other things as well. So about 5.5 years ago, I think it was in early 2015, we decided that we're going to do the next thing, which back then the decision was endpoint security. It was not the right decision, but it was the decision. Let's go into endpoint security and link it with network security. And the right decision would have been the decision we made after that, which was let's go into cloud security.
And you say that, Nir, because endpoint is a tough market, the right tech and solution, because arguably endpoint security is kind of like one of the most critical types of security.
It is. It's a replacement business. Let's start with that. Like the network security we were in. It's just that it's very hard to show value and give the customer a reason to replace. We thought that being able to detect many more attacks on the endpoint because of the linkage with the network is going to be a reason for the customer to switch to Palo Alto Networks endpoint security. Turns out customers don't give a damn when it comes to endpoint security. It's for most customers back then, it's different today because of EDR. But back then, for most customers, it was just a checkbox. And it was a race to the bottom between McAfee and Symantec about who's going to give the agent for a lower number of cents per year per endpoint. And it's not a market you want to be in. Cloud, on the other end, is a greenfield opportunity, right? Not a lot of legacy. And that's why that should have been the decision back then. But it's okay. It took us a few more years, and then we went into cloud security.
Absolutely. Before we move forward, I think one of the thing that struck with me was, start the company in 2005. In 2007, you launched the product. 2009, Gartner comes up with a new category called Next Gen Firewall. In 2011, you're anointed as the leader. I don't think a lot of our listeners would have the appreciation how hard it is to get to be product launch to leadership position, get the mindshare of the analyst, all within a span of 4 years. So Nir, beyond you just hustling hand-to-hand combat and flying and eating Maggianos, like there had to have been certain things around the company structure which allowed you for this kind of scale, this kind of marketing, this, having 60, 70,000 customers is not easy for people. It takes decades. Like, was there any other magic sauce that, we kind of glossed over?
Well, we had a disruptive product, right? So disruption helps. And like I said, it's a product that once you put it in the infrastructure just for trial, just for evaluation, it sells itself because the customer sees things that they just can't ignore. And the challenge was find the customers when they have a budget for replacing something in their infrastructure, like the firewall or the IPS or the proxy, or something that it will pay us to, and do it at scale. Right? Selling the first $5 million is easy. Selling the first 20, most startups, if they work really, really hard, can do. But getting to 100 million is really, really difficult. And that requires more than just a good product, even if the product sells itself. That requires a real company, and it requires really, really good people.
So speaking of people, actually, I was struck by one of the interviews that you had with one of the security journals. You said we hired different kind of people at Palo Alto Networks. Facebook, for example, is a company that's ruined democracy. Yeah. There are people that on principle refuse to work for such a company. They prefer working at a company that pushes the world forward, not backward. And we hired those type of people. Can you tell us a little bit more about?
That comment was about today competing against Facebook on hiring people, both in the Bay Area and in Israel and probably in India as well. And we just hire different people. We hire people that want to help the world, people that want to make the world a safer place to live, people that believe that without cybersecurity, we are going to go backwards in terms of e-commerce and online shopping, and it's going to destroy a lot of economies if we don't take care of cybersecurity and so on, versus other companies that they will do everything for money. including ruin democracies, get dictators elected, and so on.
So, Nir, I'll ask a very non-technical question now. You started the company. You are incredibly successful. You are also very, very approachable. We see this day to day on campus. You're very visible. You're talking to customers with us in EBCs. How do you make sure that you stay grounded as a founder of such a successful company?
First, I recommend to everyone not to forget where they came from. I grew up not being able to buy computer books. I had to work for a few dollars an hour in order to work for a place where I can read those books. And just don't forget where you came from. That's the most important thing. That's one thing. The second thing is, we all have the same goal at Palo Alto Networks, and I'm not going to sit on the side and wait for everyone else to achieve the goal for me or for us. I want to be part of it. Yeah, that's why I talk to customers every day, and I fight our competitors every day at customers and in conferences and building products and buying products and integrating products and so on.
Got it. Do you remember any incident in your history where you or the next in firewall prevented a major incident? Obviously, we don't have to name names, but anything that comes to mind?
So first, it happens every day, but there've been cases where we discovered. Look, with the firewall, it's a little bit hard to tell because the firewall blocks a lot of things, so you can't tell that. Hey, we prevent a lot of incident. But there have been cases where our detection technology detected a data breach after the fact. One famous case. It's not famous. I mean, we haven't disclosed it publicly, but it's related to a famous case. There was a big attack against Anthem. I don't know if you remember it. And like many other companies in California, we use Anthem. And of course, now it doesn't matter how much you're in cyber and into cyber and how much you're spending. They have my data because they probably have my home address or old address where I used to live in California, and my social security number and so on, and my medical records because of that attack. And at the same time that happened, we got a hold of the malware. And first, we discovered that our sandbox, if our sandbox were in their environment, I have to use the subjective here because it's something that didn't happen. If our sandbox were in their environment, we would have detected and stopped the attack. Okay.
Interesting.
But more importantly, at that time, we were working on a product called Autofocus. Today, of course, it's a product. Back then, it was just being built. And Autofocus is a system that can very, very quickly go through a massive amount of data we have about malware and find correlations. I mean, that's one of the things Autofocus does. So we took that malware that we discovered, that we didn't discover it, the malware that was part of that attack against Anthem. And we ran it through our sandbox, and then we took the data that came out of the sandbox and put it into Autofocus. And then Autofocus came back immediately and said that a few weeks earlier, it saw a similar attack against one of our customers.
Wow.
And meaning we saw a piece of malware a few weeks before that had very specific, unique indicators that we haven't seen in any other malware at any point of time. And of course, in any other clean file. Autofocus has a lot of clean files and malware. So immediately we called the customer and told them, hey, this attack we blocked for you a few weeks ago, know that you are the target of the same adversary group, Anthem Blue Cross.
Pretty amazing. I was at one of the largest defense contractors, and they had like this big SOC up there. And, I think the average person doesn't know how many breaches are prevented every day from actors, hackers, guy with a black hat, whatever that may be. And it's pretty fascinating. Obviously, the security industry has enough players that's helping customers against these massive data breaches, but sometimes it feels like we're just a day away from some massive breach where our power grids are going to go off, the computer systems will go down. It always feels like that.
Yeah, I'll tell you another incident I had actually here in Israel. you reminded me just now. In Israel, it was quite a few years ago, I went to visit a defense contractor, okay, a company here in Israel that builds defense, military-related equipment.
Yeah.
So I went there and I had a meeting. There were two security / network engineers in the room, and I think it was director of infrastructure or VP of infrastructure in the room, something like that. And I went through our solution. And again, my goal, like I said earlier in this podcast, was to get our box on their network, right? Because I know that when we put the box on the network, what they're going to see, they're going to have to do something about it. First they're going to go to their current vendor, which I think was Checkpoint or something like that. Here in Israel, it's probably Checkpoint, and ask them to fix it. They couldn't fix it, and then they would buy our product. Standard operating procedure. So I sit in front of them for an hour and tell them what we do, and they say, "Well, do you do this? Yes, and do you do that?" And it's very clear that there are two Checkpoint bigots that are trying to find holes in our product and find this little thing that we don't do, so they have an excuse not the product, put the product on the network. And after almost an hour, it was almost time to go. I just said, screw it. I said it to myself, right? Screw it. Hail Mary. I took out a bill from my wallet. It was, I think, 100 shekels, which is like $30 today. I put it on the table, on the table between us, on the conference room table. And I started talking to the VP, and I said, "Look, here's 100 shekels. You're going to put our product on the network. And if, like they say, we don't find anything, you keep those 100 shekels. And if we find something, you give it back to me. Okay, you don't have to, you're not losing money here. You can only make money."
Yeah.
And then a few weeks later, they put our box on the network. Within a few minutes, they saw a workstation that was leaking gigabytes of traffic to some foreign country, which is not the best friends with Israel. I wasn't there. I flew back to the US. I was here on a visit. I flew back to the US. This is a story that the sales engineer told me. Immediately, they called physical security. They had 6 guys with drawn guns run to that workstation, shut it physically down. Someone got arrested. It was all over the news in Israel. I mean, they didn't mention us or anything like that. It was all over the news, and they bought our product.
Of course. Oh my God, that is so fascinating. I was gonna say you'll end it with, yeah, the they didn't have to pay us anything, but they ended up paying us like $5 million, which sounds like.
By the way, I did not get my money back. I still have my 100 shekels, but it's okay. $30. I can live with that.
Oh, that is so fascinating. Yeah, it is so fascinating to hear these stories because the average person just doesn't know the kind of stuff that really happens. I'm going to change the subject on you a little bit, actually, going back to the people stuff. There was this fascinating quote by you, which I want you to double click. You said, and I quote, this is about people management. "As far as I'm concerned, managing people is a waste of time." First of all, can you expand on that? And second is that what advice would you give to a fellow technologist who wants to build a better future but doesn't want to go through the grind of managing people and doing the annual reviews and so on and so forth?
Yeah, no, my quote was about myself, right? I find it myself that managing people is a waste of time for me, and it's a waste of time for technical people. Meaning, I think that I recommend technical people that want to stay in technology rather than those that want to move to management, which is completely valid. I mean, there are a lot of people that are technical that see their career going forward in management, not in technology. But those that want to stay technical, I think they should focus on technology and not try to manage people. It's completely valid. That's the CTO versus the VP of engineering role or chief product officer. Now, what I also said is that for founders, it's very unlikely that a technical founder is going to be a good CEO. Okay. So if you're a technical founder, especially if you want to stay in technology and you've never been a CEO and your company might go big and you really need a sales and marketing CEO, my recommendation was from the get-go, just find a CEO. Don't be the CEO. Focus on technology and let someone else raise money, hire people, fire people, deal with the board and so on, you focus on technology, which is really why you started the company. That's what you know how to do well. The other challenge with technical people saying to themselves, well, I'm going to start as the CEO, and then when the company starts growing, I'm going to find a CEO and I'm going to do something else. It's very difficult. It's very difficult for a coming CEO, a new CEO, to run a company where the old CEO is still in the company. Okay, it's too often it doesn't work. It might work, but too often it doesn't work. So my recommendation to technical founders is don't be a CEO. Hire a professional CEO.
Absolutely.
It does matter that who you work with or who you start the company with, because there is a trust factor when you're focusing on the technology side of things, that the right people are getting hired and there is a equal say, I think. So definitely having the right team to start the company is also very key. And
Of course. Look, even if you hire a professional CEO, an experienced CEO, let's call it, to run your startup, certainly in the early days of the startup and until pretty late in the life of the company, the founders are much more important than the CEO. And the CEO knows it. If there is, for some reason, a fight, it's the CEO that's going to have to leave and be replaced, not the technical founders, not the entrepreneurs. Okay? So, yeah, it has to be cooperation. At Palo Alto Networks, we went through a few CEOs in the early days. We started with the CEO, Dave. And then as we started growing, Dave left, and we hired a CEO named Blaine. And then as we were preparing to go public, we needed a CEO that was able to do that, and we hired Mark McLaughlin. Okay, and then Mark left not because of a change in what the company does, but because he wanted to spend time with his family, and we hired Nikesh. In between Lane and Mark, we had 9 months where myself and Rajiv, we were co-CEOs. I always joke that that's the period of time where Palo Alto Networks was growing the fastest. We grew at an annualized rate of 300% at scale, at scale of tens of millions of dollars per quarter during that period of time.
That is fascinating. Yeah. Silicon Valley should experiment more with different types of work structure. One where there is no CEO. There are, I guess, couple co-CEOs, if you will, but it's completely decentralized organization. Hire the best engineers, they know what to do. Hire the best legal people, they don't need a CEO to set the tone. Pretty fascinating.
so you are in Israel right now, and Demisto is, I come from a company which is Israel based, and I'm just fascinated with the cybersecurity DNA that's there. Why do you think there are so many security startups coming out from Israel?
I think it's a checkpoint. Checkpoint. Some people say it's related to the military, maybe. There are cyber organizations in militaries around the world, not just in Israel, not just in the US. I don't see a lot of cyber companies in those areas, but probably, somewhat related to the military, where you have people with experience in cyber when they leave the military, which in Israel is a requirement. There is conscription in Israel. So I think part of it is military, but I think a big part of it is Checkpoint. Checkpoint is, I think today Checkpoint is the largest Israeli company. Palo Alto Networks last announced quarter, I think we were almost 3 times bigger than them in sales, but or even more than 3 times, but about 3 times bigger than them in sales. But still, they are the largest, most valuable company in Israel. So people see that and they want to be the same. And of course, there've been a lot of exits in cyber, some IPOs, a lot of sales, like the Misto. People see that and they know that cyber is a good area to be, and it's just a machine that's feeding itself. You have a lot of people with experience, all starting with Checkpoint, and then those people left. They started companies. I started mine in the US because I was living in the US, but many started their companies in Israel, and it started a snowball.
Sometimes also think it's a mindset. I've worked in India, I've worked in US, I've worked with people in Israel. The mindset is very inquisitive, and nothing is taken for granted. I think that is also a huge differentiator. A college kid coming out of an India college versus Israel is going to be very, very different. At least that's what my experience has been. Yeah.
Great. All right, Nir, last couple questions before we go to our rapid fire round. So what's the next $1 billion idea in security?
I think we have quite a few of them at Palo Alto Networks.
Are there anything, are there like, if you think about 5, 10 years, anything privacy related? I know it's kind of top of mind outside of the stuff that obviously Palo Alto does, cloud and network, endpoint. Any big industry trends that you foresee?
Yeah, of course, a few. There is data. I think cybersecurity is going to be more and more data based. And of course, we believe we're leading that at Palo Alto Networks. There are other vendors that do that. I think data is going to be more and more important for cybersecurity. And the difference between vendors is not going to be as much as how good the software is. It's still going to be that, but I think how good your data is going to be more important. And so that's, I think, one trend. I think that the pandemic has accelerated some trends that are going to be very important going forward. Of course, cloud security, where you are involved, Ankur, the move to the cloud is accelerating, and cloud security is going to be very important. But also work from home or distributed workforce is important. Not having infrastructure, not just data center infrastructure, but any infrastructure, that's accelerating and that's important. I think home security is going to become more important as more and more people work from home. And that's, I think, going to be an important trend in cybersecurity. And I think an area where Nilima is focused on, which is automation. We're getting to a point where security cannot be operated by people. We're getting to a point where there's just not enough talent in the world to operate security. And more and more of security will need to be operated by machines.
Yeah, security or just about everything. I think the AI and robots are taking away jobs from just about every industry vertical. And security industry will not be spared.
I don't think security, I actually think that I'm not worried about the jobs of security analysts. I think they will always be needed. It's just that we're going to give the machines all the mundane work that they do today and have them focus on the more difficult work that machines cannot replace, work that requires thinking. Of course, that means that security analysts will need to have additional skills on top of what they have today. Like, for example, they need to know big data and machine learning and things like that. And we need to figure out how to educate them around that. But I'm not worried about their jobs as much as I worry, for example, about the jobs of network engineers. As the network disappears and it all becomes delivered from the cloud, that's probably a job that's going to be more at risk versus security engineers and security analysts.
And last question before a rapid fire, Nir. You don't really have to work for a living anymore. What gets you up and excited every day?
Convincing our customers to use our solutions. No, it really upsets me that there are customers that don't. The challenge in cybersecurity is that it's very hard to tell what works and what doesn't work. So it's very easy to fake cybersecurity. And most of the vendors in the industry are faking cybersecurity. They count on customers not knowing how to test products. So they're faking security. Most of the testing labs work for money and can be convinced as to what to test and what not to test. And they just sell it. And at Palo Alto Networks, from day zero, we decided that our culture is going to be different than that we're not going to lie to customers, and we're going to be proud of everything we do. And we believe that our products actually block attacks versus many of our competitors that don't. And convincing the world of that one customer at a time is hard, but that's what I do. I'll rest when we have 100% market share.
Amazing. Spoken like a true founder. Thank you, Nir. So we've got a just real quick couple minutes, a rapid fire round, quick yes or no. or short blurb type answers. So we're going to get started on that. All right. Best engineering mind in the industry, in your opinion?
Machine learning.
Okay. The GPT-3. Your favorite book, blog, pod, anything on security. Somebody wants to get into security. What's like the thing that has made the most impact on you?
I haven't read security books, but I would go to the security canon and look at the list of books there. There's a really good list of books there.
Okay. Do you expect more fragmentation or consolidation in security industry over the next decade?
Both. Meaning, I think that we're going to see more consolidation of the larger vendors, but I think that the data economy is going to enable very small vendors, innovative vendors, 2, 3 very smart engineers in a garage to build really meaningful solutions.
Very good. Are there any white spaces in security that nobody's thinking about? Obviously, even if you knew one, you wouldn't give them the idea, but any big area nobody's paying attention to?
Not that I know.
Okay, got it. Couple more. Flute or piano?
So I play the piano. I've been playing the piano for almost 40 years. And I played the flute when I was in 2nd and 3rd grade. So I know a little bit of flute, but I can certainly play the piano.
Got it. And the last question. What one advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change
Fascinating.
anything in my past. No advice. Just keep doing the same thing you do.
Pretty incredible. Well, Nir, it's been such a pleasure to speak to you. Like I said, you are a celebrity, and just to have an opportunity to speak with you for an hour, been really informational for us, and I'm sure for our listeners. We look forward to maybe having you a year from now or something like that when there's a Gen 5 of the firewall or the cloud security. Love to have you. Thank you so much.
Anytime.